Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Can I Have a Word, the podcast that explores language and its impact on our identity and the people we become. I am your host, Carl James, and we have another great episode in store today. Very excited and very special guest. And so, let's just jump right into it. So here's a question. What happens when the very thing that we've always been taught to do, stay quiet, hold back, keep the peace, what happens when that starts to cost us more than it actually protects us? In today's conversation, we're going to explore the subtle and often invisible ways that people are socialized to suppress their voices, whether that's in boardrooms, classrooms, and yes, even within our own families. We're also going to talk about what it takes to reclaim the right to speak up, speak out, and be heard. My esteemed guest today is Elaine Lin Hering, a speaker, former Harvard Law School lecturer, and the author of Unlearning Silence, How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. Together, we're going to unpack how power, identity, and personal history shape our relationship to voice, and why breaking those patterns can be both terrifying and transformative. And with that, I'd like to welcome Elaine to the podcast. Hi, Elaine. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am so good. This has been a while in the making, and I'm glad we were finally able to get it on the calendar. So it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. So as a first-time guest, I would love to, get to know a little bit more about you. I mean, I know about you, but I'd like to have other people learn about you. So the first question I usually like to ask first-time guests is, what is the story of your name? And you can take that anywhere you want to. And I know there are a lot of places you could take it. So
listeners, this is a whole episode.
In and of itself, truth.
And I think useful for a conversation of personal background. So I was born in Taipei, Taiwan. And the name given me by my parents was Ling Yi Liang. So Lin as a family name and Yi Liang meaning kindness and happiness. When we immigrated to the States, my parents realized that having an anglicized name would be advantageous and also mean that I would be made fun of less at school.
That is a common belief.
Yeah.
I will say that.
Well, yes. Yes. Amen. So what sounds anglicized but similar to Iliang? Well, there was a news broadcaster by the name of Elaine Corral in California at the time. And so my parents named me Elaine.
Wow.
So my name growing up was Elaine Liang Lin. Unclear whether there was a hyphen between the E and the Liang. No one could ever pronounce it. I felt like my whole name had too many I's and too many vowels. Like you don't get any money for vowels.
A mouthful for a young kid. Yes.
Totally. But I was Elaine. There was one blonde girl at school who called me Lainey Lin in a really high-pitched voice, and that meant that I never liked nicknames. But when I graduated Harvard Law School, I was afraid that the person handing the diploma to me would mispronounce it. So I left my middle name off. Wow. And I just wrote Elaine Lin. And that was my first iteration of my Harvard Law School diploma, JD. My mother was deeply offended. In erasing my middle name, I had not acknowledged the sacrifice of the family in immigrating and denied sort of representation. And so I paid $150 to get a replacement diploma that had my full legal name at that time, Elaine.
Hold on. Did mom not understand why we did it? The practical reasons why we did it, not the sort of like loaded version that she was kind of leaning into?
And if I were to go back and do it again, why should I not have my full name represented because of someone else's inability to pronounce it accurately?
Right. True.
Right. Who's absorbing the cost? I am. And I was okay with it at the
time. Quite literally, actually, because you then paid for
$150.
Right. Literal and figurative cost. Yes.
And folks will know that my legal name is now Elaine Lin Hering because when I got married, we had a whole conversation about whether I take my husband's last name, as many women face this conversation.
Yep.
Then there was a question of whether I become Elaine Lin Hering or just Elaine Hering. And Google was my friend at the time. I Googled Elaine Hering, and the first hit at the time was an 86-year-old woman in Texas, white woman. And the first result was her obituary.
Oh, so available?
And I thought, available, not a whole lot of competition. I was on a business trip to Hawaii at the time, and Tammy Friedman was supposed to pick me up. So Friedman, I grew up with a friend, a Jewish friend, brown hair, freckles, with the last name Friedman. So I was expecting someone who looked like my friend Lisa Friedman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Tammy Friedman shows up. Turns out she's Tammy, formerly Yasuda Friedman. So tiny little Japanese woman.
Wow.
And I thought, I've got to have Lynn in there somewhere to show that I am Asian American. Otherwise, people are going to be expecting an 86-year-old dead woman showing up when they pick me up. Again, there's lots of flaws in my logic or argument, but that is the long version of how I came to be Elaine Lin Hering.
Okay, so we knew there was a story there, but wow.
Oh, there's a story also, for the record, for Southerners. I'm not Elaine Lin, like Sherry Lynn or Mary Lynn or Sue Lynn. Lynn is my middle name. It is one of the most popular surnames in Greater China.
Wow. Okay. That
Elaine
is
Lin Hering, folks.
That is the story of your name. That, again, could be a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yes.
But here we are. Thank you for sharing that. And where did you grow up?
California.
Gotcha.
I'm a Bay Area kid. Bay Area native. I was born in Taipei, but moved here when I was 10 months old.
Wow. And still there to this day.
I pit stopped on a couple different continents and a couple different states.
Couple of different moves, but
made it back here.
Amazing. All right. Well, I can't wait to get into it. So let's just do it. Elaine, can I have a word, please?
Silence.
No surprise. Now, we all have a basic understanding of what silence is. As a noun, it's the absence of sound. As a verb, it can mean to prevent from speaking. Elaine, you have a very particular framing around silence. So I would love to hear how you think of it, and then we can take the conversation in all the different directions.
Yeah. Silence to me is an absence of voice. It's when there's not enough room in the conversation, on the team, in the relationship for your needs, goals, hopes, and concerns, right? In order to stay in the relationship, keep your seat at the table, you've got to bite your tongue. That you don't want to rock the boat too much because your seat or your status is already so tenuous. It's also when you want to say something, but the costs are too high. Or you really want to hear what people have to say, but they're unwilling to say it. I came to this because lots of people, being the stereotypical quiet Asian American woman, said to me, just speak up. And just speak up was be louder, be more clear, have more confidence, have more courage, as if it were that easy. And after traveling the world, working across 6 continents, geographies, industries, training hundreds of leaders in skills for how to negotiate, have difficult conversations, give and receive feedback, I realized some people still don't do those things. And it begs the question, why not? And to me, the answer is silence. In what ways have we learned that our voices, our presence, parts of ourselves are not welcome? In what ways do the teams, the partners that we have, the environments we're in continue to send us messages day in and day out that we have to edit out parts of ourselves in order to be palatable or accepted? And so if we really want to live fully, if we really want to unleash the talent on our teams, we've got to be able to solve for silence of where might people be editing or self-censoring, leaving out parts of themselves and their ideas, because the message that we've sent collectively or individually is, you're not welcome here.
That's extremely powerful, and that's just the first question.
We got a whole conversation, Carl.
I know we're digging in. So I'm curious, when did you first start to understand the sort of cost of silence? When was that something you felt early on? Was it something you saw in your family? Where did the sort of idea of like silence being a problem sort of originate?
I think silence has always been a problem, but I never had the language for it. Because if you look at leadership development or personal development, personal growth literature, right? All these self-help gurus or leadership development experts, basically no one's talking about silence. Brené Brown has this one line in an Oprah interview of if you have shame and silence and judgment in a petri dish, bad things happen. But other than that, no one's really talking about it. Instead, the problem is framed as if you're not getting heard, it's because you don't have enough confidence. So you need to work on your self-confidence.
You need to speak up louder.
You need to speak up louder, clearer, better, smile more, smile less.
Right.
Contort yourself, and then maybe you'll be heard or maybe you'll be accepted, respected. Versus my big realization in my side yard by the trash bins, I kid you not, was I think we've all gotten it wrong. Right? We have been sold a bill of goods, which is you need more self-confidence. And even if you get that, you still don't get the results. What if we've fundamentally been asking the wrong problem, which is not how do I speak up more, better, louder, clearer, but how do I solve for silence? What role does silence play in my life? Because if I don't understand it, I very easily buy into the way that the statement in the world is presented to me. And so in 2020, in my side yard by the trash cans, I thought, what if we've all just been getting it wrong? Because it's not that I'm not using my voice. It's that the one version of using my voice is either on the streets protesting, speaking up constantly in meetings. And there are reasons, I was breastfeeding at the time. I had a parent doing chemotherapy in the middle of COVID. And so there were tangible reasons why using my voice, i.e. protesting on the streets, the murder of George Floyd, didn't seem like an option.
Right. We all felt, many of us felt compelled at that point to speak out.
And if I'm not speaking out in that way, then am I not using my voice? Am I not a good person? Versus, wait, it's not just that I need to be out on the streets or use my voice more. I've actually learned to stay silent, right? Let me just give a little bit more flavor.
No,
I'm
please.
the youngest daughter of an immigrant family from Taiwan to the United States. I grew up in the Christian church. Maybe that explains it all, right? If I'm the youngest daughter in this highly patriarchal society, I'm not as valued as the boys in my family. To ask a question of my elders is to be disrespectful. I'm supposed to turn the other cheek.
I wanted to dig into that too. And, you're kind of already there, but I did want to sort of really get a clear sense of like growing up in an Asian family, like we sort of know the stereotypes as they're portrayed in media. And I just wanted to know like how true some of those are. Like, are boys really valued more than girls? And it seems like the answer is, in fact, yes.
I will say it depends on generation.
Okay.
Right? My grandparents' generation, definitely true. My parents tried really hard to make things equal between me and my older brother and to send the message that you both are valued, both are valuable, both are worthy. We're going to give you the same resources, equitable opportunities. That was a conversation I had with my mother prior to my book coming out, because there's a passage in my book where I talk about being the daughter in this context. And she's like, but we really tried. I was like, I know you tried. And grandma had a different perspective, right? Grandma still gave him the better piece of meat at dinner because boys are more valuable.
To the meat? I mean, really? Like, it's that serious?
I mean, it's a different generation, right?
Yeah.
I can have empathy for it, but it also doesn't have to be what controls my choices going forward.
No, that makes sense. But wow, it's really ingrained in that sense.
Well, and in talking with my Latina sisters, discovered, it's not just Asian American culture, right? There's this phrase, calladita te ves más bonita, which roughly translates to you're prettier when you shut up.
Okay.
Right?
Not
that gets
subtle.
repeated.
Not subtle at all.
Not subtle. And there's another one involving mosquitoes that my Spanish is too rusty to repeat here.
I mean, and that just goes to show like how ingrained these ideas are, and they're perpetuated from generation to generation, and maybe a little less so as, we get to more modern times, but it's kind of always in there.
It's always in there. It's in the backdrop. And the opportunity for us is, how are we going to live going forward? Because we can't change the past, we can learn from it. But if we don't see the past clearly, we don't realize that we have a choice. So we've defined silence, but to me, voice isn't just the words that you say in a meeting. Voice is how you move through the world. So if the status quo is, I look prettier if I shut up, or to ask a question is to be disrespectful to my elders, well, that's how things were interpreted at a certain time. Is that my MO going forward? Is that how I want to show up in the world? Do I think that's true? Do I think that's right? But if you're not actively questioning the things that we are fed, we end up perpetuating the status quo, right? Because you're just trying to navigate this system versus, how do I have agency to shape the future of my own life and in my sphere of influence?
And you're not necessarily even looking to, rock the boat, if you will. You are just trying to live your life on your terms. But sometimes that also means really investigating these ideas that you've just grown up with or that have been perpetuated throughout time, and people either were afraid or didn't feel comfortable or didn't think they had to question these ideas. But I mean, it does require that level of investigation if we ever want to sort of break through, which I really appreciate. So I want to dive into this concept of unlearning, which I think is really interesting. So can you talk about what it means to unlearn silence as opposed to simply breaking it? What is the difference in your mind?
To me, it is an ongoing process, which is why my book is titled Unlearning ING rather than Unlearn. I don't think we're ever done. I'm not done unlearning silence, right? It's not a check the box exercise. If you have learned and been conditioned and habituated to stay silent, to not have or express an opinion, to not consider your own needs, goals, and hopes and concerns, you don't flip a switch. Right? It's not that you break that habit once and you're done, especially when the world is telling you, no, we like you better the other way. It was more convenient for us when you were the other way, because I could just take credit for your work and you wouldn't complain, right? I didn't have to consider you in this equation of what we need to solve for. So unlearning is both signifying that it is an ongoing process, that it is a journey, and also that we can't build a firm foundation on quicksand. So unlearning is how do I excavate some of these often unconscious assumptions that we have about how the world works, like boys are more important than girls, or women should stay home and take care of the kids, right? That those things were assumed at certain points in time. Do we ever question them? Do we choose that this is what I want to do, what I want to perpetuate or not? Do I disrupt that? And so to me, it's not enough to just build new skills, right? Learn to negotiate more, better in this way, more interest-based creative options. But really, what undergirds all of those ways that I show up in the world? The unlearning is how do I excavate what's there so I can build on a firm foundation going forward on the premise that I as a human being matter, regardless of how other people perceive me.
Yeah, I mean, it really does require a sort of deep internal sort of reckoning, if you will, with how have I been socialized to think about these things, and seeing all the different places where they show up. And I remember there was an example from the book that I thought was so poignant in a very simple way when you talk about, new ways of trying to sort of utilize your own voice. You talk about being in an Uber and asking the Uber driver to lower the window.
Yeah.
And I thought, that can't be an example, right? That's far too simple. And yet it is. So, I mean, can you talk about just how minute some of these examples can be, but how powerful they really are? Because I literally sat there with that when I was like, do people really have this conundrum in the back of the Uber? You could just ask. He wants a good rating.
All right, listeners, if you have an opinion on this, let Carl know. Offer some
Tell
feedback
me.
in Spotify or wherever you hear your podcasts. It's hilarious to me because the Uber example and the toilet example in the book are the ones that I get the most feedback about.
Okay, now you're going to have to talk about the toilet example too.
Toiletgate, absolutely.
Yeah, that's another one, but yes,
But
go ahead.
the Uber example is I'm in an Uber. I've just flown cross country. You know, I've got airport in my lungs. We've got traffic. I've got 20 so minutes until my destination. I try to open the back window to get some fresh air and it won't open, right? Child lock is probably on. And I'm sitting in the back seat thinking, can I ask him to open the window, the driver? Because I don't want to be a pain. You know, he's like listening to a podcast or on the phone or something. I don't want to interrupt. Then there's another part of me that's like, I'm a paying customer, right? I should get the experience that I want. I need some fresh air. Then there's the calculation, particularly as a woman, of is this driver going to get mad at me? Am I going to end up in a ditch? Which some people may say you're overreacting, Elaine. And there's all of that acculturation, right? Of you've got to be street smart. You've got to be careful. I didn't even think about the driver wanting a good rating from me. And also the driver doesn't know that I want fresh air unless I say something.
Right.
But this is literally like a 10-minute debate inside my head where I'm like, oh, no, I'm fine. It's not a big deal. I can stomach it, right? Like I can take it. And then I finally decide to experiment by saying, sir, can you open the window? He didn't say anything back. He just presses a button.
Did it?
And like, you know, everyone says Pacific Northwest air in the United States is glorious and fresh and crisp. Oh, the angels were singing, right? When the window finally opened. But how many of those, for some people, there is never a hesitation, as you described. Like, why wouldn't you just do this?
And again, I recognize the gender dynamic there too. Like most men, if we're being honest, not even a question. Yeah. I want it. You ask for it. It happens. And it's a different question for women because there's a safety component. There's a not wanting to take up too much space or interrupt. Yes. So I get it.
But same thing, right? When I teach workshops on this content, one of my questions is you order a meal at an upscale restaurant and it's too salty. Would you say something? Would you not?
Yes, I would. Okay,
but not everybody would, right? Some people are like, it's the bread basket. I'll just hit it hard. I'll drink more water.
Yeah.
Right? Do we am I being a pain? How are my dining companions, particularly my colleagues or my boss, if I'm out to dinner with them, going to view me? Are they going to think I'm complaining or, too high maintenance?
That is true. It does depend on the circumstance, who you're around. Right? I don't do it all the time. Sometimes I've just been like, well, it's salty, here we go. But yes, there are times when I will do it. But yes, it's an evaluation every time.
It's an evaluation every time. And the challenge is if we forget that there's an evaluation and a choice. Right? Because I'm so used to just suck it up, deal with it. Because I don't have as many experiences in life when I said something, asked for something, and actually got what I wanted. I have experiences of I asked and someone shot me a look. I asked and the conversation moved on as if no one even heard what I said. And I'm like, did I say that out loud?
And you're like,
or was that just in my head?
I did.
Right?
Yeah.
But how many, and it only, the different research around positive experiences versus negative experiences, depending what research you look at, it's between 5 and 7 positive experiences to counter 1 negative experience, right? If you don't have those positive experiences, you learn very quickly your voice doesn't matter, your needs don't matter, and over time you stop asking.
Because there are consequences for asking those questions. And the
consequences are too great.
Yeah.
And you learn that the Mandarin phrase for it is 忍受. Like, I can absorb it. And it becomes a point of pride of, I'm good. Not a problem, right? You're easy. You're a good friend, a good teammate because you're easy to work with.
Yeah, that's tricky. And I find
I'm not going to push you when you want to go for Thai food when I really want to go for Italian.
Yeah. And so can we talk about because I feel like in your personal life, that question around what are we going to have for dinner or something like that. Yeah. Okay. I think we can agree not great consequences if we have to just have the meal we don't want to have. But in workspaces, your professional settings, it does feel like the consequences are much greater and potentially, not career ending, job
Limiting.
limiting. There you go.
Yeah.
So can you talk about like the distinction there and how one can get to a place of being more comfortable with speaking up when the consequences feel a little bit greater?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer of how do you get more comfortable with speaking up is you've got to experiment. And there's no replacement for reps. You can theorize all you want, you can intellectualize all you want, but there's no replacement for actually doing the thing.
Right.
Now, where and when and with whom you do the thing, that is where I encourage small, finite, low-risk experiments to try to get the data points of it's okay, right? It didn't actually kill me. I wasn't fired. Maybe there's some positive response or at least a reaction that says, oh, they heard me. Maybe it's not a yes yet, but they've taken it under advisement. But I wouldn't start with the boss who already seems to hate you.
Yeah, maybe not a good starting place.
Yeah.
So
start low risk.
So like low risk, what's the like as an example? Like you're in a meeting, you have an idea.
Yeah.
We're just brainstorming, share the
Yes.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. How many times do we edit out ourselves, not share the idea because we don't want to look silly, because it might not be the best idea, because it might not be perfect?
It's not fully baked. We haven't fully thought it through. Right.
Well, and also how can you lower the stakes for yourself? You can say, this is just ideation, or this is half baked, or I'm thinking out loud here, right? Like lower the expectations of others and of yourself to then share the idea versus self-censor.
And not say
because
it at
you
all.
weren't sure how it'd land to say it at all. Other phrases that I love are, I see it differently, right? If you're pushing back. Different doesn't mean bad unless you're in certain toxic cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Different just means different. I see it differently. Or from where I sit. From where I sit in finance, this doesn't seem like a good decision. Maybe it makes sense from an engineering perspective or a legal perspective, right? From where I sit acknowledges the limitation and the legitimacy of my purview of the world. It also naturally begs the question, what does it look like from where you sit, Carl?
Right.
Because you sit in New York and I sit in California and we have different teams. We have a different aperture.
And it invites
of the
that
world.
conversation to sort of see how my purview is different from yours and where we intersect, where we don't, and allows for the conversation.
Totally. But the challenge of learned silence is because I am not omnipotent and I don't have all the answers and access to all information in the world, I often don't even offer my from where I sit because I know there are limitations versus we each have different pieces of the puzzle. We got to put it together and we're better for it. So can I at least own from where I sit? This is what it looks like. What does it look like from where you sit?
Right. So I have a question in relation to, we've already talked a bit about gender as far as, being silenced or feeling silenced. Thinking about the sort of like racialized and class-based components of that, I was thinking about 2020, and you mentioned the aftermath of George Floyd and how that was a sort of, I'll use the term racial reckoning. People have their thoughts about it, but it was a moment where it felt like that was happening. And we were sort of collectively allowed, I'm using a lot of like air quotes for people who are not watching this on the YouTube.
These are future episodes, future words
to
unpack.
I know. It's so much.
Watch out for the next season.
So that was a moment where we were, quote unquote, allowed to speak up about racism in a way that we maybe hadn't felt that we were allowed to before. We were using all the acronyms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and add justice in there. Those things felt like they were okay to talk about. Cut to current times where the DEI acronym has now been essentially co-opted, villainized, and we've sort of been silenced again as it's basically become forbidden to talk about. And we've had to sort of almost rebrand it in order to make it palatable to people. And so I wanted to talk about the sort of cyclical nature of silencing, where there are times where we feel like we can collectively speak up, and then it feels like we're in a time where we're not being encouraged to speak up and we should be saying less or saying it much sort of quieter. And you even later in the book, you reference this idea of mitigated speech, which I would love for you to talk about. But this feels like a moment where if we are allowed to speak, it's definitely sort of mitigated speech. And, we can dive into what that means. But can you just talk about these sort of swells in the culture where we can talk about certain things and then we can't?
Yeah. This is why earlier I defined voice as not just the words you say or don't say, but how you move through the world. Because there are going to be things in the headlines or who's at the top of an org chart that signify how welcome conversation about certain topics is or are more broadly. And there was a lot of, are we allowed to do it? And that's why I always go back to agency. I want to be clear. Chapter 3 of the book is my favorite. It's titled When Silence Makes Sense, because I want to be really clear that unlearning silence does not mean saying everything all the time to everyone.
Right. You do point that out and you highlight when it does and when it doesn't. And that's
far too noisy.
Yes.
Totally. And the difference between silence that is additive and strategic and silence that is damaging or frankly oppressive is agency. Am I choosing when and where I want to lend my gifts, skills, talents, ideas, and insights? Because the reality is there are some contexts where it's not welcome, where it is too costly, right? If I'm going to speak up publicly about certain social issues now or use certain acronyms, do I need to dampen it? Do I need to rebrand it? And go back to how do you want to move through the world?
Right.
And am I allowed to, right? Air quotes. Whose permission are you asking for?
It's like a royal power up there, some benevolent person.
Not so benevolent, by the way.
Not benevolent, truth. Yes. But some higher power that we've given sort of the authority to make that determination to, which doesn't really make sense.
In which case you have given up the power that you have to move through this world with intentionality based on your own values. So the first place I'd go is, who are we asking for permission from or looking for approval from? Now there's the reality that we live in or work at, work for places that do not welcome certain conversations.
And those have been made clear.
Those have been made clear, and strategic silence is part of how we're all navigating those environments now. And there is how do I use the privileges I have to show up in the world the way that I want, to shape the world that I want? Is silence cyclical? I think there's always a pendulum swinging, right?
An ebb and flow to it.
What is welcome, what is not welcome, but the way that you don't get trapped up in that pendulum swinging is to know who you are and what you stand for and how you want to move through the world. Because otherwise you're going to get pulled under by those waves. Now I'm mixing analogies, right? It's exhausting.
It all applies though.
It's exhausting, and the way that we use our voices may look different. Right? It's not, it could be protesting on the streets. It could be organizing. It could be pushing back in a meeting. But that also goes to your wiring, that goes to your gifts, that goes to the things that you care about. And how do I not get swept up in this tone policing or topic policing that is frankly exhausting? And if I'm swept up in it, I often forget that I actually have power, maybe not to change the world, but to change someone's world.
Absolutely.
By how I show up.
And I think one of the things that has been difficult for me, even going through the sort of, call it DEI backlash that we've seen, is that I used to very sort of loudly and proudly call myself like a DEI practitioner as opposed to like an administrator, because I think of a practitioner as somebody who sort of lives it, breathes it. It's like who you are. It's fundamental to how you show up in the world, as we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And the fact that that has now been sort of co-opted has made me really question now, well, what do I call myself now? Because it's not It's not cool. It doesn't have the same sort of glow that it used to have. Now it feels tainted.
Yeah.
And I've, come up with alternate language. Here we are on the language podcast. I'm cultural strategist and things like that. And I kind of felt ruffled by it at first, but I think about like language is also cyclical. There are terms throughout time that at one point we would never say. I mean, think of the word. I mean, this is an example. The word queer. You would never want to say queer because that meant like it was disparaging and all of that. And then it has been sort of reclaimed and repurposed, and now it is the sort of one of the umbrella terms that we use to talk about the LGBT community. So language can have these sort of moments of resurgence, and I think it's hard when you're sort of like in the midst of it and you kind of see it going from one end to the other. But I think understanding that reclaiming new language for things allows you to not feel silenced and that you can still speak about things. You just have to put a slightly different sort of nuance on how you reference it. But it doesn't mean you have to not talk about it or that it is forbidden. And I think that's the trick of this moment, is to not get, as you were saying, not get swept up in the, I can't talk about any of those, whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, or justice. No. Those are things that are all still pertinent and that we need to be talking about. Maybe that specific acronym isn't going to get you as far as it used to, but the work and everything that's embedded in those words still lives on.
Here's how I think about it. There are always costs and benefits to any way that we show up. And this is the essence of chapter 3, right? What are the benefits of staying silent, of not using that acronym or that word? What are the costs? What are the benefits? And what our brains do, usually subconsciously, is if the costs seem too great, we're inclined towards silence. What has changed in this moment is the benefits of using D, I, B, J, whichever permutation you want, more broadly have diminished, and the costs, particularly from a federal perspective, and if funding is attached, have increased. Right? Those are the things that change in the cost-benefit analysis, even if the ideas, the things we care about, the things we value may not have changed. And then the question is, how do you want to choose to show up in this moment? How do your actions still reflect the things that you care about, so you're moving from a place of agency? Right? There are still some people, mostly independent contractors, who are not affiliated with organizations, ones that are not affiliated with, impacted by federal funding.
Right. Who still feel like they can talk about the things as they want to.
Or if it depends, right? But those are choices that everybody's making. But the thing that anchors you is, who am I and what do I care about? And then I can choose the packaging, because as you said, the wording can change and words are going to mean different things over time. But who you are at the fundamental level
stays the same.
I mean, I'm
evolves. It can evolve.
We evolve.
Yes, evolves.
We evolve as we choose our relationship. But I would hope, is a conscious choice of, is this who I am? Am I showing up how I want to, the who that I want to be? Because I have one life to live, so let me live it well.
Absolutely. I brought up this idea of mitigated speech, which I believe is a term that Malcolm Gladwell coined. But can you talk about that? And what I specifically wanted to ask your opinion on is whether you think mitigated speech is better, worse, or the same as silence, because it's a form of allowing your views, thoughts, opinions to be heard, but maybe not as forcefully or as, passionately, or whatever adverb you want to use. It's there, but it's maybe not as there as you want it to be. So can you talk a little bit about that idea and sort of how you think of mitigated speech in this whole context?
Yeah. So for listeners, and for clarity's sake, since we're being precise here, Malcolm Gladwell just popularized it. Linguists, people who research language, have identified mitigated speech way before Malcolm.
Got it. Thank you for the
mitigated speech, the idea that we are not as clear as we think we are, and there's a whole range of directness that human beings use to communicate, starting from a hint, which is the least direct, like, gee, it's cold outside, when what you really mean is it's unsafe and we've got to go back and de-ice. Making an observation, asking a question, making a suggestion, a proposal, and then most direct is a command. So, we can add things to the show notes if people want a visual of that, or folks are visual learners. But this idea that there's a whole range of directness, and mitigated speech being, we think we're being clear, but we're actually not as clear or direct as we think we are for a whole bunch of reasons, often relating to culture and expectation. So one study of this is with pilots and co-pilots, and some really tragic instances where planes crashed because the more junior co-pilot said things like, gee, it's cold outside, when what they really meant was, it's unsafe, we have to go back and de-ice. Your question of, is mitigated speech good, bad, ugly, is at least how I heard it.
Basically.
I'd say mitigated speech is. Right? It just is. It is a phenomenon in the world that there's a fantastic article by Keisha Winters on low power language being incredibly strategic. And I mention it because there's a world of leadership development that says you've got to be more direct, you've got to be more clear. Well, that works for certain people with certain identities. Versus if you're the junior person on the team, let's say you're Asian in a predominantly white institution, you being super direct and commanding people isn't going to go over particularly well.
Not going to work.
Right? We all know that the low power language, we think about it at work, but also with certain family members.
True.
And I can hear some in my head right now. It's the long pause.
I know them. I have
right,
them.
girl? Yeah. What are you? Who do you think you are?
Yes. I mean, I've gotten better with age, but yeah, there's certain, once you reach a certain age, you're like, well, here we go. It's just happening. But yeah, like it takes a while to get there. You don't just start out like overruling like older folks in your family, or, speaking out at the dinner table, saying things that probably shouldn't be said.
Now we all want to know which conversations with which family members you're thinking about.
Oh,
Carl.
So many. But anyway, another episode.
But that, that's why I land at mitigated speech isn't inherently bad. You take certain Asian cultures do not communicate directly. That doesn't mean it's any less effective. It's a question of what are the dominant norms in this culture and how clearly do we understand each other. Understanding doesn't have to come from directness, however much a North American culture, let's say United States culture, American culture would have us believe. So much as what might we be missing in the mitigation. And if I'm not being heard, is it because I'm actually not as clear as I think I am? Right? I'm thinking that's a horrible idea that's never going to work. But because the decision maker is my boss and has influence over my career, what I say is, have you thought about X? Right? Because the question seems safer.
Right.
But they don't know that I think it's a horrible idea because I haven't actually said that.
You haven't said that.
And then I'm thinking, well, you're not listening to my warnings. Now, the easiest way that we can close that gap is move somewhere else on the range of directness to say, I have strong concerns. Or from where I sit, that's a horrible idea. You seem to think it's a good idea. Help me understand.
Get me to
right?
that
That's
place.
actually,
right.
That's very different than, interesting.
Well, and I loved your example from your book when you were talking about, I think you were traveling with your brother, and you talk about like even the question of, hey, are you hungry? And I think he says no. And then the subtext is you're starving and want to eat.
Correct.
But he just says no. And therefore you proceed, no food is had. Versus
Correct.
if you had said, hey, I'm hungry. Can we stop to eat? Like, I think, and it's a subtle point, but it's a really important one because I do this all the time where I'm like, you should have understood the context clues that I was giving. That said, I'm asking you if you're hungry. The flip would be, well, how about you? And we assume that people think like we do. And
Correct.
It takes some humbling to recognize that people often don't think like us. And so the things that seem obvious maybe aren't as obvious. And to your point, you do often just have to say it more directly, move a little further along the sort of mitigated speech sort of pendulum, if you will.
Yeah.
But I just thought I was like, oh yeah, that happens all the time.
Yes.
And we question, like, why didn't they understand that that's what I meant?
Yes.
Who
And
knows?
social psychologists would tell us reciprocity is strong. So if I ask you, are you hungry? You should ask me, are you hungry? But again, to your point that I think is true, not everyone thinks like us. Everyone can't read my mind, which is probably a good thing, especially when I'm thinking not so positive
Not great thoughts. Right. Reciprocity is not something everyone adopts.
That shift from are you hungry to I'm hungry is a fairly straightforward one for me to make that makes it exponentially more clear for the listener to understand what I want. Now, the learned silence in that is, should I have any hopes or needs? Am I taking up too much space with my hunger? We're going to get to the museum late if we stop for food, right? All of that can be acculturation for those of us who've been taught that we need to think about others first and ourselves not ever.
Right. Oh, yeah. If ever, but yes.
Yeah. Is it okay for me to be hungry? Is it a natural human condition? Absolutely.
But is it an inconvenience in this moment? Should I wait,
Correct.
delay it? Right.
That's learned silence versus the unlearning of I am a human being. I also have bodily needs that are just as important as my brother's or anyone else's.
Yeah. No, I just love that example because I was like, especially with your sibling, I was like, just tell him you want to eat now. But
which he eventually got after I was like seething, furious, mad.
He was like,
annoyed at him.
Wrong.
He's like, why are you pissed? Like, because you're totally inconsiderate.
He eventually got it. I wanted to know, I mean, I'm sure a lot of things sort of surprised you, but maybe what surprised you most while you were writing Unlearning Silence, either about yourself or maybe from the stories that you captured from others?
The most surprising thing was how universal silence is and was. Right? I started out thinking it was just a me problem. And then I started having conversations with clients about it, and it resonated, right? That it's not just tell people to speak up more. It's really wrestle with what role does silence play in your life and your leadership. That's the unlock, because when we speak up, it's not always well received. And silence is also, how are the people, even the well-intentioned leaders in my life, silencing me by assuming that I am just like them, or any of the other 9 ways that I mention in the book. But I was surprised, especially with Calladita te ves más bonita, of how deep it runs, right? Apparently it's not just me. It's not just my family. It's not just my culture. It is many cultures
around the world,
many families, many people, and at least diagnosing the problem accurately as one of silence is a first step to solving for it and allowing us to live fully.
No, I love that. And I think it's captured so well in the book at how, like, there's so many different examples of little ways, big ways where, you know, this idea of like silence sort of comes up. Something that I've been wrestling with, and it's maybe not directly related to the book, but it ties in. So I'm one of these people because I think, like, you know, I talk about all the time that I've been in and out of therapy over 20 years, and I'm all in touch with like the emotional intelligence and the awareness, and I've got all these tools. I think I'm so great.
You're evolved.
That I try to create space for people to share exactly how they're feeling. Like, especially when it feels like something's a little off here, or there's some distance or something. And I think that I've created a dynamic where people can and should want to be honest with me. And yet it so happens that oftentimes that does not actually happen, whereby people still withhold, and I'm not even talking about mitigated speech, I'm talking about limited to no speech. Like, it just doesn't come up. And
Yeah.
I'm always wondering this idea of like, I hate the word intimidating, but like this idea of intimidation and like power dynamics when it feels like some people have more language to talk about the things than others, and that people feel silenced because either they don't think they're going to win the proverbial win, or it doesn't feel worth their time. Even when the floor has been ceded to you for you to share your opinion, some people just sort of opt out. If you think of like sort of like traditional, we think of like a lot of relationships where women ask for men's opinion and they're like, whatever you want, just, like, again, very stereotypical, but this idea sort of persists that like, even when given the opportunity, sometimes people don't necessarily take it.
Yeah.
How do we sort of sit with that? And do we just have to accept that sometimes people will choose silence and you just have to accept that silence is what people prefer?
Yes. Or it's what they know or what they can stomach and do now. So the short version is, Carl, it's not all about you.
I know, but shouldn't it be? No, I'm kidding.
Right. You're like, here I am. I'm a safe or safer space. Why don't you trust
Share
me?
the things. I'm here. I'm open. And
yes. And they may not be in a place to do it. Right? They may not trust that you are who you say you are or who you know you are, because when they see you, they don't see you. They see their uncle, that weird uncle, or they see their former manager. And so there's a trust building aspect to, my former manager, it didn't go so well when they said I could ask questions, and I asked questions and here I am.
Yeah.
Out of a job. Right? So it's actually not about us. It may be the role, right? VPs are this way. You can't speak to VPs in this way. And you're like, but I'm not a VP. I'm not all competent, all knowing. I'm just Carl.
Right. I'm just here. But what people see on the other side, you don't know.
So there's a lot of prescription of what can leaders actually do. And this is a problem I solve for with teams, which is how do you get people to actually speak up? Because leaders cannot make good decisions, sound decisions, based on incomplete information. And we need people on our teams to give us accurate information.
Right.
But if they're not willing to give us accurate information, we can't do our jobs, but they don't trust us necessarily that it's going to be okay if they do, from all of the things in the past. So I've got an HBR, Harvard Business Review article on how to actually get your teams to speak up, if that's a helpful resource to folks. But the biggest place I'd go is if people aren't taking you up on the invitation that you have extended, it's not all about you, right? There's how do I extend the invitation? How do I make sure that my actions back up the invitation? Have I actually extended, going back to mitigated speech, have I actually extended the invitation? Because I may just assume that if I would have said something in the moment that other people should too, so I don't remember that I actually have to ask,
right,
or invite or make clear. Am I requiring that people speak up in the way that I would prefer, like real time in the meeting, versus creating other avenues where they can share their thoughts and insights, like asynchronous communication in Slack is just as valid as a real time comment in our Thursday morning stand-up? Right? Am I pigeonholing people to have to communicate to me in my preferred way rather than playing to their strengths? So there are a whole bunch of levers that we can pull to try to lower the stakes for people, make sure that they hear, I'm curious, I want to hear what you have to say. You don't have to have it perfect. You don't have to use the latest lingo, latest language. It's not about intellectual accuracy, all of those things. And at the end of the day, the other person's on their own journey as well.
Yeah. And you just have
unlearning
to
silence.
Let it be after you've, given all that you can give.
Do what you can do and let it be, because you also can't force it. And it's not about you.
I know.
It's not all about you.
I know. It's really not.
I'm sorry.
Just keep repeating. I'll just keep.
You're welcome. Put that on repeat. It's not all about you.
I know. Oh, anyway.
Even as you matter.
I know. I matter, but it's not all about me all the time. So
correct.
I can't believe how much time has already gone by. So many other things I wanted to ask you. We do have to go back to Toiletgate, because I did say that we would talk about it. And people are probably like, what was that toilet thing that he referenced? So in what little time we have left, can you talk about quickly Toiletgate, whatever that was?
I mean, this is a good example when you're saying people can't read my mind. It is in the framework in the book of 4 anchors of how to speak up. The first being start with why, the second being connect the dots, the third is make your ask clear, and the fourth being embrace resistance. Connecting the dots, people can't read your mind. So when my husband and I first moved in together, he said he was going to clean the toilet. I said, great. Right? We're like equitably sharing household division of labor. Fantastic. I come home from a business trip. I look at the toilet. It's not clean. And so I say, well, let's this weekend, let's clean the toilet. And he's like, but I cleaned it. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at the yellow streaks. I'm getting graphic here.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yellow streaks on the outside of the toilet bowl, right? That have the dust clumped to it. Clearly not clean.
Not clean.
And so he said, but I cleaned it. And I'm now questioning my judgment as to who I've married. Hence Toiletgate.
Right.
And it took us a while, but it came to light that he cleaned the part of the toilet that he believes we use, which is the inside of the toilet bowl, the part with the water. And I had fast forwarded to if we have kids or toddlers crawling on the ground, they're going to lick the outside of the toilet bowl and we've got germs. And, we go there.
The worst case scenario. Yes.
We go there, questioning our relationship. We go there. I just want to be real. We are human beings. And it was you can't read my mind. We don't always have the same definition of what clean means.
Right.
And so it can feel demeaning to have to spell out, can you clean both the inside and the outside
yes.
of the toilet? And that their clean means no yellow, no dust left.
In case
squeaky,
you need to
preferably.
Know exactly what I mean by clean.
We're not even going to measure bacteria per square inch left, right? But that so often we get frustrated when people don't get us. And we may not have actually been clear what we mean by clean, and we may not have agreed on the sort of acceptable standard for our understanding.
What do we both understand about the word clean?
So now we both understand that clean means inside and outside.
You learn the hard way, guys.
We learn the hard way, but that's Toiletgate.
I love that story because it again sounds so ridiculous, but it's emblematic of the reason why we need to have these conversations about understanding like what it means to speak up and using our words clearly across both sides and not just assuming that people read our minds and understand what we mean when we use these very sort of generic terms.
Totally. Is doing laundry. What does doing laundry mean? Does it mean putting it in the machine? Does it mean moving it to the dryer? Does it mean folding it? Does it mean making it back into wherever you keep your clothes? Who does laundry? Anyways, the roommates examples are ripe.
So many. Well, on that very colorful note of Toiletgate, I think we can leave it there. Elaine, I can't thank you enough. I mean, I read this book and the entire time I read it and listened to the audio, and just the number of times where I was just like nodding in agreement. I was like, oh yes. Yes, this too. And I felt like I had met a kindred spirit. So thank you so much for enlightening us in this way and like sharing these ideas. Again, it can sound so simple, but it's so much more layered and nuanced than we think. And these dynamics exist everywhere, again, in our workplaces, in our personal relationships, in classrooms. And I think unpacking it in this way and giving people actual tools to, kind of work through some of these things that have been so ingrained, I think is really impactful. So thank you.
Absolutely. And for anyone who feels like, gosh, this is a lot of work, right? Now I need to spell out what clean means. Notice that you're actually doing a lot of work right now, figuring out when and where not to say something, not figuring out the workarounds when your own needs aren't getting met, right? Having to bite your tongue, that is also work. The things that keep you awake at night because people haven't heard what things look like from your point of view, there's exhaustion there. There's hard work in unlearning silence, but there's also opportunity. So, Carl, thanks for having me. Folks know my real name is Elaine Lin Hering, and it's Unlearning Silence, a journey that we're hopefully all on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elaine. And with that, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us, everybody. And I'll see you on the next episode of Can I Have a Word? Have a good one, y'all. Bye.